Federalism is fundamentally about a principle of federal accommodation and all forms of federal restraint that shape the nature and structure of these institutions, of which we speak in great detail and whose procedures and processes occupy us in our debates on federalism. Right from the beginning, there have been grumblings among states for good reasons, and there have been all efforts by central governments for their own reasons to trample over powers of the state and misuse some of the centralizing powers that are baked within the Constitution.
Prime Minister had talked of all three tiers, but along the way, the third tier is not being talked about. They have reduced it to now third tier, the bottom tier, actually the most important. 3 million elected people. You have left them aside. Now, who are you talking about? 4,120 MLAs and 543 MPs. He didn't say that it leads to corruption. Every election leads to increase in corruption. It leads to increase in communalism, hate discourse, casteism, crony capitalism.
So, although the focus of this conclave has been one nation, one election, federalism, and citizenship, as you can see, its scope covers everything starting with the CAA and the NRC, the SIRs underway, past and upcoming state elections, the conduct of the Election Commission of India and other state institutions, the planned delimitation of constituencies, the recent attempt to use the Women's Reservation Bill to sneak in a delimitation exercise and an expanded parliament through the back door, the formation of a demographic committee, which has largely escaped attention, and a politically timed census.
दुख भरे दिल से यहाँ आए थे, उससे ज्यादा दुख भरे दिल से वापस जाएंगे। सिचुएशन बहुत मुश्किल लग रही है। क्या वन इलेक्शन, क्या वन नेशन, देयर वोंट बी ए पॉसिबिलिटी ऑफ एनी काइंड ऑफ इलेक्शन एट ऑल। इस हालत में हम पहुंच गए हैं।
नमस्कार दोस्तों, मेरा नाम हैदर अब्बास नकवी है और आप लोग मुझको इस वक्त द स्वतंत्र पर देख रहे हैं। इस वक्त स्वतंत्र की टीम कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल क्लब में है और यहाँ पर आने के पीछे बहुत बड़ा कारण है, क्योंकि हमारे संविधान में, हमारे कॉन्स्टिट्यूशंस में, हमारे उसमें एक फेडरलिज्म शब्द लिखा हुआ है। उसका क्या मायने हैं और आज के दौर में जिस तरह से सरकार, मौजूदा सरकार काम कर रही है, उसमें फेडरलिज्म कितनी इम्पोर्टेंस रखता है, इसी को आइए चलते हैं। कुछ वक्ता हैं जो हमें बता रहे हैं कि किस तरह से फेडरलिज्म को ख़त्म किया जा रहा है। वन नेशन वन इलेक्शंस भी आ रहा है, इसके चलते फेडरलिज्म को कैसे चोट पड़ेगी, कैसे उसे ख़त्म किया जाएगा और इससे एक आम नागरिक को, एक आम भारतीय पर क्या असर पड़ेगा। आइए चलते हैं कॉन्फ्रेंस में, जानते हैं कि कौन से वक्ता हैं और वो क्या बता रहे हैं।
Yamini introduced herself yesterday that she identifies as Tamil, Punjabi and Malayali and also of course a Delhiite. So who better than her to talk to us about federalism? Thank you.
As a half Sardarni, half Tamilian, embraced by my Malayali in-laws, I can speak to the tyranny of paneer in Trivandrum and the watery sambar in Amritsar, all of which together make me Indian. And for me, that's why I want to present my remarks today on federalism. First, as a defense of the principle of federalism. Very often, when we speak about federalism, especially in these days, we immediately move to the intricacies of political, institutional, administrative, fiscal arrangements. But underlying all of these arrangements, demands for state rights, questions of representation and one vote, one value in the context of delimitation, revenue sharing in the context of fiscal relations, we must always be reminded that federalism is fundamentally about a principle of federal accommodation and all forms of federal restraint that shape the nature and structure of these institutions, of which we speak in great detail and whose procedures and processes occupy us in our debates on federalism. The structures of those institutions and those processes have to be anchored in those norms of federal accommodation. And the true challenge to my mind of federalism in today's India is that precisely this idea that you can be many and you are still one is the idea that is being challenged. It is often said of Indian federalism as designed and architected in the Indian Constitution that it is indeed a deeply centralizing form of federalism. Quasi-federal is how some federalism scholars have defined Indian federalism. Indeed, B.R. Ambedkar himself argued that that Indian federalism, the Indian Constitution is both unitary and federal and can move between the two depending on the time and circumstance. But the nature of that centralization was anchored in a recognition that for a country that recognized our many political identities within the context of our Indian political identity, federal accommodation was a necessity. It was necessary for me, therefore, to have federalism in order to be a little bit of Tamil when I feel like it, a little bit of Sardarni when I feel like it, especially when I have to roar loudly and tell my children to do their homework. And a happy Malayali eating appams and mutton stew whenever I so feel like. The core of who we are as Indian is very much inextricably linked to the idea and principle of federal accommodation, and the institutional and political arrangements that the Constitution arrived at through that are designed to preserve and that particular form of our sense of nationhood and our sense of identity. A unitary majoritarian political ideology is by definition uncomfortable with the idea of federal accommodation. It is no accident that we are seeing a significant challenge to federalism today because the notion of who it is that is an Indian citizen, as we discussed this morning as well, is fundamentally very different to the idea of who you are as a citizen, where you can have multiplicities of political identities alongside with your core identity of being a member of the Indian political community of the Indian nation state. All forms of centralization that we are experiencing today need to be debated and understood from this perspective. It isn't as though states' rights have not been trampled over in the past. Indeed, right from the beginning, there have been grumblings among states for good reasons, and there have been all efforts by central governments for their own reasons to trample over powers of the state and misuse some of the centralizing powers that are baked within the Constitution. But the nature of federal restraint always remained because there was this fundamental agreement within that the pushes and pulls of our multiplicities of identities could be accommodated through federal principles. And that afforded some degree of federal restraint. With that gone, you can have an attempt to, you can abrogate Article 370 and downgrade a state. This isn't just a matter of political and institutional procedures. It is a fundamental assault on the idea that the state is meant to recognize your subnational political identity, which is now going to be subsumed under a broader majoritarian one. The nature and form of centralization today looks in some ways similar to the type of centralization that we have seen in the past when we look closely at our fiscal and institutional arrangements. The role of the governor, which often comes up in many of our discussions today, has not always been a benign one, but the Supreme Court recognized it and put in some checks and balances. Those recognitions and checks and balances, even today when the Supreme Court does recognize it, finds other ways in our political discourse to be undermined, as we saw when the state of Tamil Nadu went to the courts over the issue of the governor delaying the approval or a complete passage of laws in the state assembly. Politically, new ways were found to undermine even the Supreme Court. We spoke this morning about the abdication of the judiciary. There is also another element to this. On the rare occasions when the judiciary stands up for the basic structure, the very basic structure that the judiciary argued for, politics has found new ways of abandoning all forms of central restraint, of federal restraint, and undermining some of the more positive aspects of what the limited positive aspects of what the judiciary has done. In the fiscal realm, we've seen a very interesting pull and push. For a long time, the union government has essentially used its constitutional powers to to collect taxes, and then distribute the taxes through the finance commissions as well as through centrally sponsored schemes as ways of trampling over arenas that are constitutionally within the state subjects. Education, it's on the concurrent list, but a large part of the implementation of school education in particular is within the domain of states. Similarly, public health, agriculture, there's a whole range. Centrally sponsored schemes were a way by which the union government, there are many bureaucrats here, they may take a slightly different view, but I have observed many interactions between the government of India and the state governments in slightly more benign times, where secretaries of government of India essentially sit with a little bit of a danda and tell the state governments what to do, because they have the powers through centrally sponsored schemes and other resources to push a one-size-fits-all way of getting things done. The Planning Commission with its plan funds was often argued by states as being yet another mechanism through which the union government would impose on subjects that are fundamentally constitutionally state subjects. But over time, there had been some slow efforts, particularly through the Finance Commission, to expand devolution of the divisible pool of taxes to states. The most notable was with the 14th Finance Commission in 2015 that expanded the devolution of the divisible pool of taxes from 32% to 42%. The union government found a new method to hold on to resources for itself. It increased by over 20% cesses and surcharges that are not shareable with states to reduce the total amount of resources available in the divisible pool. It then changed the sharing ratio of centrally sponsored schemes from what used to be a variation between 60-40, 75-25, and 90-10 to 60-40, the latest in the shift from NREJ to VBGRAM-G, new acronyms coming in as new ways of centralizing and imposing tyranny, all of which have reduced further the capacity and the opportunities for the states to implement as per their own recognition of their own needs and priorities and the political rights that states have by virtue of being elected by the people of their states. This is being justified through a very important phrase that we need to recognize and seriously challenge: the idea of a double-engine sarkar. Ultimately, the center needs more resources, and the state and center need to be aligned, because that is essential for development. It fundamentally challenges the core of the federal principle. Accommodation is about dialogue, deliberation, differences, pulls, and pressures. Those dialogues, deliberations, differences, and pulls and pressures always made their way into the very complex and almost mundane in some ways issues of processes and procedures around institutional and fiscal life that shape the everyday of federalism in India, where the union found its ways to trample upon states consistently over many decades, yet it had to allow for accommodation, it had to allow for dialogue and deliberation. All the meetings where Secretaries, Government of India would maro dandas at states also had states coming back and pushing back. The National Development Council ensured that chief ministers and and their chief secretaries and other representatives of states were in constant dialogue with the center. There's no need for dialogue in a double-engine context. When the government of the day says to its electorate, vote for the same government at the center and the state, because it gives you quote-unquote efficiency and development, it is essentially pitting the federal principle of accommodation, dialogue, and deliberation in contrast with the possibilities of development, almost arguing too much democracy is not good for development. This is exactly what we need to challenge when we speak in defense of the federal principle and when we speak in defense of federalism for India. There is, however, a second issue that I want to raise. There are many paradoxes in our federal discourse. I've spoken a lot about what the union government has done to ensure that it contains power, but states have also played their own double game. Raja Chalaiya once said, everybody loves decentralization, but only to their level. States speak very loudly and vociferously if you are of the opposition party in these days, but for states' rights. And there will never be a day, even today, when the union government can get away with not setting up the Union Finance Commission to determine the devolution of taxes or based on the formulae between the center and the states and across states. But states do not afford the same luxury to the level of government that is most important to all of us as ordinary citizens of this country: the local governments, the panchayats, and the municipalities and urban councils. Decentralization to local governance in India is extremely limited. Less than 3% of public spending takes place at the local government level. And by the way, I have no idea whether this figure I've given you is right or wrong, because the data is so hard to get. And that's not a new issue. It's been around ever since the 73rd and 74th constitutional amendment. The lack of space that states have given, with very, very few exceptions, Kerala being one of the few, to empowering local governments is one of the biggest blotches in our democracy. And we cannot speak to reviving the principle of federalism and strengthening our democracy without strengthening the grassroots structure of our democracy. So states have been quite complicit in doing to local governments exactly what the union government has done. And what it does in this process is it opens up the channels for a deeper form of centralization. A close look at the 16th Finance Commission report is interesting and important in this regard. The Union Finance Commissions, to their credit, have been consistently devolving finances to local governments where states haven't, even though constitutionally this is meant to be aligned to the setting up of state finance commissions and the formulae that the state finance commissions identify for devolution of resources to local governments. Most states have failed on this front, but the union finance commissions have allocated money to local governments, both at the panchayat as well as at the municipality level. The 16th Finance Commission, and they lament consistently the absence of finance commission structures at the state level. The 16th Finance Commission has taken that lament one step forward, saying, well, if states continue to renege on their duty, perhaps we should remove this clause from the Constitution as a thought process. It's not a mandatory recommendation, but it introduces the idea that you could have deconcentrated local governments where you bypass the state altogether and the union and the panchayats become, and municipalities become integrated into a deconcentrated form of devolution, which undermines fundamental democratic principles that were baked into the 73rd and 74th Amendment. States have to bear the blame for opening up the possibility of precisely this kind of discourse in our federal discussions. The 16th Finance Commission has also done another thing. States have rightly been complaining about the use of cess and surcharges to undermine resources that ought to be made available to them, arguing that the devolution divisible pool of resources should be increased from 42% to 51%, and some cap should be put on cesses and surcharges. The 16th Finance Commission has said, in fact, a new grand bargain should be entered into. After all, in a double-engine imagination, the union needs a lot of resources to ensure development. And so, union will accept a ceiling on cesses and surcharges as long as states are willing to consider a reduction of devolution from the now almost accepted 42% over these last 10 years to less than that in order for the union to have availability of funds. And again, states have played a role in allowing for this, because in the breach, various state governments have not filled in the gap of improving their own spending on core welfare spending, preferring to wait for funds that come from the center and then complaining about the center not providing with those funds. So it opens up the scope politically to push the idea of double engine as essential to development, and opens up the space of the union moving forward towards a more deconcentrated version of federalism rather than a genuinely decentralized and democratic one. I'll end by coming to the two most critical issues that confront the nature of the federal bargain today. and reiterate that states too need to awaken themselves to the importance of federalism as a principle which they too have to live up to if we are to move forward in addressing the very big challenge of the federal bargain that we confront today in political and institutional terms. The challenge has come about on the fact that we have a very unique reality within the Indian Union of great social economic inequality between regions. There are some parts of India, particularly the southern and western, that have experienced near Chinese rate of growth over the last 30 years. And then there are other parts of India that are largely supplying labor to the more productive parts of the country, where growth has been extremely slow. So UP's per capita GSDP looks closer to Nepal, and Tamil Nadu's per capita GSDP looks closer to Indonesia. How do we deal with questions of resource sharing, revenue sharing, amidst this kind of inequality? And also, how do we deal with the question of delimitation? Because after all, population count and economics growth do tend to be closely intertwined. So how do we ensure fair representation without reducing voice of all parts of the country? This is not an easy thing to resolve. Southern states in particular have been raising their voice around the equity principle of revenue sharing that was core to the formulae on the basis of which revenue was being shared intrastate between states horizontally, arguing that we are more productive, therefore we contribute more to the taxes, and therefore we should be getting more, but UP, which is less productive for its own governance reasons, is getting far more, even though its contribution into revenue provision is far lower. And in fact, the 16th Finance Commission has introduced now a 10% of their formula around performance contribution to GDP as one of the bases on which revenue sharing will take place. This is a very difficult conundrum. If you break the equity principle that has informally been accepted since the first or second Finance Commission, you raise very important questions about what does it mean to be an Indian citizen. After all citizens of India should be entitled to minimum public services regardless of whether they are born in Bihar or born in Kerala. At the same time, there are good questions being raised by states who feel that their own autonomy has been undermined, and now they are not even able to access resources that their own good governance has generated for themselves for their own development. Balancing equity with performance requires a very deep and detailed dialogue. Performance of GDP is not an appropriate measure in my view. After all, the contribution of cheaper labor from Bihar to Tamil Nadu to ensure that enables some of Tamil Nadu manufacturing is also perhaps contribution to GDP. So we need to have a dialogue over how we balance equity and performance. Similarly, the bargain around representation. There is a big question about the nature of delimitation, how it is to be achieved, the size of parliament, whether that is going to allow for some accommodation, and how to ensure that the voices of all parts of India get equally heard. Again, these bargains cannot be resolved by bulldozing legislation through parliament and bulldozing the idea of delimitation without dialogue and debate. It needs a union that is trustworthy. It is unfortunate that today we do not have a political arrangement at the union government that speaks to the federal principle, and therefore it's hard to trust its willingness to engage in a federal dialogue. So perhaps the answer has to come from states. Tamil Nadu set up the high-level committee under Justice Joseph Kurian, which I think was a very important signaling of what states can do to initiate a dialogue amongst themselves. But that dialogue has to reaffirm and reassert the relevance and importance of the federal principle as the core that will enable federal restraint as we resolve these very complex, knotty issues. And maybe, just maybe, states can recognize that they can only really ask for more or rather defend the federal principle better when they live up to the federal principle themselves, and at minimum set up the state finance commissions that they ought to have done per the constitution. Thank you.
The undersecretary writes the longest note, deputy secretary writes the long note. By the time it reaches the secretary, we have to do the extreme hard work of writing 2 words, I agree. So I agree with what all he said. I have nothing more to add. So with that, I'm open to any questions. But since I've been paid some honorarium of lunch and a coffee later, I have to speak something. I'll take you, I may be making some points which may go contrary to your the spirit of the session today. First of all, I would like to remind what did PM say about 14 years ago. He said that he talked about the cost, and he talked about work paralysis because of election, prolonged model code of conduct, the work, everything comes to a standstill. Then he mentioned something important, interesting, save party workers their time. He was more concerned about party workers' time, that they are spending too much time and money in electioneering. Don't. Holding simultaneously, so panchayat, urban local bodies, states and parliament. Now this is important. Prime Minister had talked of all 3 tiers, but along the way, the 3rd tier is not being talked about. They have reduced it to, now 3rd tier, the bottom tier, actually the most important. 3 million elected people. You have left them aside. Now who are you talking about? 4,120 MLAs and 543 MPs. So that's so much for the determination for simultaneous election with this much of dilution. Then what he didn't say, which actually goes in favor of, I would support simultaneous election. He didn't say that it leads to corruption. Every election leads to increase in corruption. It leads to increase in communalism, hate discourse, casteism, crony capitalism. If before every election all these things happen, I'll be very happy if these things happen only once in 5 years. Okay, so say all the rubbish that you want to talk about for 1 month, hold the election for 5 years, let the nation live in peace. If that is the condition which is going to be achieved, I think simultaneous election will have a good point. Also, every election is also leading to the war of the freebies, which is destroying our economy. But of course, the data is becoming increasingly invisible, and it is considered an hostile activity. Then the cost. What is the cost? There are 2 components of the cost. One is the actual election management, on which the government or the election commission spend the money, which is estimated to be a rough estimate of 4,500 crores or 5,000 crores, which is peanuts for a country of India's size. That's no big deal. But political parties spend 2019 election statistics had come from Center for Media Studies that 1 lakh crores were spent by various parties on electioneering. Now, I have again a counter the point of view on that. I think that's a very good thing. 1 lakh crore of politicians is being spent for and being redistributed among the poor. I think that's a good thing. They're getting jobs, painters, carpenters, auto drivers, and everything. At least the politicians' black money or white money, it is getting recirculated. So what is the wrong way with that big expenditure? Then the other thing that the policy paralysis happens, the work comes to a standstill. That is total, sorry, I must check myself, totally incorrect statement, because if you read the model code of conduct, and I strongly advise all of you, because we keep having election all the time, please download it. It is a 15-page document, and you'll find everything under the sun is allowed to happen except 2 things. You can't announce any new scheme to woo the voters, which you should have. Why is it that सारे bright ideas of government को सिर्फ election से 1 महीने पहले क्यों आते हैं? 4 साल 11 महीने पावर में रहने में कुछ नहीं करते, सडनली उनको ब्राइट आइडिया आता है कि जी ये हम ये देंगे, ये करेंगे, वो करेंगे, पहले क्यों नहीं कर लिया? That is the only thing which is stopped by the election commission and nothing else. Several times actually we had to summon the cabinet secretary. साहब ये हर मिनिस्टर से शिकायत आ रही है कि उन्होंने फाइलें बंद कर दी, काम करना बंद कर दिया. Please tell them not to do that. Only no new policy and no new transfers. These are the only 2 things which are stopped. Everything has to continue. Please do read the model code yourself. Then one thing was about the terms of Lok Sabha and Vidhan Sabha do not coincide. That is something which is important, which is what I'm trying to do, the jugglery, which Justice Shah tried to explain. This is what they will do. But look at the fact of the 16 Lok Sabhas, 8 were prematurely dissolved. So now something happens in the Lok Sabha, some MPs change sides, and 28 states where the elections have been held and they have come with absolute majorities, they also have to be dissolved because Lok Sabha has got dissolved because some MPs have been bought over. Now this is absolutely absurd. So why should politics in the Lok Sabha or in the national capital affect the state where the dynamics are totally different? Why should they be forced to go for another election? Another thing which Justice Shah was mentioning, that suppose the Vidhan Sabha is dissolved, there will be a midterm election, except for the remainder of the period. So where is the reduction of the poll? This becomes an extra poll. And that poll with all the expenditure, all policy paralysis, only for 2 years, 2.5 instead of 5 years. So are you really reducing the expenditure and the work paralysis which you were talking about? Not at all. So this is also an absurd thing. Now, I would like to say that there are counter arguments in favor of frequent elections, which I have been mentioning. First of all, it enhances accountability. How many times have we seen a poster posted जैसे धर्मेंद्र missing, wanted, ये सब गायब हो जाते हैं इलेक्शन जीतने के बाद 5 साल के लिए गायब. At least repeated elections bring them to your door repeatedly with folded hands. So it increases accountability. Secondly, as I had mentioned earlier, in the case of money expenditure, jobs are created because of the election. So why should they be stopped? In fact, I remember once I had attended a youth convention in Pune, where a young girl from Chhattisgarh came out with a very interesting slogan कि जब जब चुनाव आता है गरीब के पेट में पुलाव आता है. I think she said it very beautifully. Actually, it does create economic opportunities for the poor. So why should they be stopped? Then environment is talked about, although we are 186 out of 188 states in the world, but we talk about it a lot. Now, there are lots of environmental benefits of elections. Thanks to the Election Commission, I must say. Now, we do not allow defacement of property, which was common. It started with Mr. T.N. Session. Somebody will come and on your house walls, they will make big paintings, and you will spend thousands to get these cleaned. And now that defacement is not allowed. There is a check on noise pollution, air pollution, on use of plastic. You can't use any plastic throughout. And these are all beneficial to environment. And incidentally, none of them is in election law. These are normal laws of the land which nobody bothers about, at least when it comes to election and election commission comes into power. That is when we implement all these things. So we are repeated elections actually are good for then law and order. Because the moment the law and order comes under the election commission, you will notice, see the crime statistics, they go down drastically. Because we control, we start raiding suspects for their illegal arms. and even legal arms are asked to be surrendered by individual notices. We start checking 6 months before the election what is called NBW, non-bailable warrants. And we call the SPs and others, okay, look, how many people are absconding from law against whom there are non-bailable warrants, but you have not been able to arrest them with the excuse that they are not traceable. They are not traceable, but you find them on page 3 every third day, inaugurating something or doing something, but police record says that they are not traceable. Now we say, look, if you do not trace them, and some of these cases are pending for 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, and not 15, 20, 2,000, 3,000. If you do not find each one of them in the next 2 months, look for.
Friends, I think we were introduced as going to present this together, but it's actually going to be one after another. I'm going to begin with a bit of a summary of today's proceedings. Sorry? Double engine, quite double engine. So I will begin with a little bit of a summary, an impossible task really of what has transpired today. And Aditi will follow up with a very suggestive, generally indicative plan of action. So through the course of the day, we've had an illustrious series of concerned citizens, top judges, scholars, activists, lawyers, and former civil servants share their insights with us on a virtual cascade of initiatives unrolled by the government, whose intent and purpose could destabilize India for years to come, and some believe that could even tear its social fabric unless it is halted and reversed. It's our sort of unenviable task to try to capture the richness of the discussions that we've had this morning. So quite naturally, this will be just a light skimming of the surface. And also the suggestions that we'll be proposing will be something that will be ongoing. We'll be inviting suggestions from the audience, from the speakers, and perhaps, compiling this into something more durable. So although the focus of this conclave has been one nation, one election, federalism, and citizenship, as you can see, its scope covers everything starting with the CAA and the NRC, the SIRs underway, past and upcoming state elections, the conduct of the Election Commission of India and other state institutions, the planned delimitation of constituencies, the recent attempt to use the Women's Reservation Bill to sneak in a delimitation exercise and an expanded parliament through the back door, the formation of a demographic committee, which has largely escaped attention, and a politically timed census. These exercises are not isolated, but interlinked. They are part of a grand design. They have been devised with the overt intention of polarizing the Indian population to win elections on communal lines, disenfranchising vast sections of Indians on communal and political grounds, weaponizing suspicions regarding illegal migration and Muslims in particular, revising the basis of Indian citizenship from birth, naturalization, and domicile to political and communal loyalty, altering the balance in parliament between the North and the South, rebalancing center-state relations in favor of the former, eroding checks and balances between the executive, legislature, and judiciary into one mutually reinforcing system without debate, and imposing a majoritarian agenda on a basically pluralist palimpsest that is India. Its ultimate purpose is to radically reshape the idea of India from a secular democratic republic to a Hindu Rashtra, in which minorities survive only at the sufferance of national and in some cases also state majorities, and could get worse in terms of possible statelessness. It will be accompanied by a slew of enactments that will turn the enlightened provisions of the Constitution on democracy, citizenship, rule of law, religious freedom, personal law, human rights, including freedom of expression and religion, and basic principles of jurisprudence, such as the presumption of innocence until proved guilty. And we also had the example of presumption of citizenship discussed earlier today. All this will be turned on its head. Its eventual result will be to turn India into an atavistic, revanchist, authoritarian, draconian, totalizing state, police state, that serves the government's cronies. After the controversial West Bengal elections, the BJP looks invincible. Most Indians, as well as the political class, now feel that the party is an unstoppable juggernaut that they must either join or acquiesce to on its way to a two-thirds majority, even in the current parliament, with the help of its deep purse and the machinery of the state. Many believe that this is inevitable. Yet, its outward confidence betrays an inner nervousness. The results of the 2024 general elections were not according to its plans and expectations. The failure to pass the 131st Constitutional Amendment Bill on women's reservation, on which there was general consensus without the delimitation and expanded parliament provisions attached, was its first legislative reverse in parliament. It betrayed both uncharacteristic political misjudgment and a desperate hurry to rush through its radical legislation to change India and its image before 2029. It had already sort of set out steps towards doing that after the 2029 elections. It has not been able to bring the Farmers' Bill back to Parliament and not been able to see the NRC and CA through. It seems to have no answer to the emergence of the Cockroach Janata Party, though cynics and skeptics doubt its longevity and, if not, its integrity as well. In Tamil Nadu, an entirely new political party has emerged, not owing allegiance to the BJP, bursting the monopoly of established Tamil parties. The economy has been buffeted by the US-Iran war and structural weaknesses, as well as mismanagement within. India's foreign policy is at its nadir. Geopolitically, India is caught in a vice between the three major world powers, the US, China, and Russia. In West Asia, between Israel, Iran, and the Gulf states. And in South Asia, between China and our neighbors, with little room for maneuver and at the mercy of all. The world still courts India for its market, but the mask of India as a democracy and an emerging or regional power is paling. In response to these challenges, the government is flailing in all directions, adjusting and readjusting its strategies, generating controversies to distract attention from its real agenda, sending abrupt, destabilizing, and disruptive messages on almost everything from passports and citizenship to the future of local clubs to formulas for representation in parliament. Its recourse to a draconian use of the SIR, that is effectively an NRC through the back door without even the flawed due process of the latter, is itself an acknowledgement that it is not confident of winning elections without weeding out undesirable and inconvenient sections and elements of the electorate, and also its misuse of the machinery of the state. It is consistent on only four things: the weaponization of the state against undesirable communities and individuals, the exclusionary SIR exercise, the demolition of the opposition, and its reliance on and support for its crony capitalists. No wonder the leader of the opposition has declared that elections are over. It's time to return to the party's origin as a force of resistance and liberation. But that is a battle for political parties for fight. It is ours only to propose some ideas.
Actually, in a sense, mine is the easiest part of this session. I think we've heard all morning to a slew of really scintillating speakers and with outstanding analyses of what our country's been going through. And I think, as Gautam was saying, that many of us psychologically almost have kind of written an obituary that ye to hoga, aisa hi hoga, and we're sort of waiting for the inevitability to unfold. And I would just like to say that, only 37% of our country voted for this government. There has to be, all of us are sitting here. All of us are on the same page. We have to think of a way of doing something that stems this juggernaut. We just have to. I think we owe it to ourselves. And I don't think we should think of it as an impossibility. And I am here, and I think we should devote this one session just to that. What does this mean? How are we going to deconstruct the elements of what our sort of effective action can positively look like? So what is a democratic protest? What is a peaceful protest that can actually find resonance, that can actually find an impact and an answer? Is there a total, supposing, I was just thinking aloud, suppose Karnataka is undergoing the SIR as we speak. Now the government has taken a very proactive position. Government has actually done a decentralized exercise to every single mohalla. There is public discussion. There is a dissection of all the methods of exclusion as in logical discrepancy. What are the 7 items that constitute a logical discrepancy? Well, let's talk about it. Let's dissect it. Let's solve it. And this is happening in Karnataka, which of course is a government that is friendly to ensuring that there are fewer and fewer exclusions under SIR. But if this can be done in Karnataka, why can't we do it everywhere? Why can't we do it in the next states that are going to be undergoing SIR? Make a programmatic schedule, find people who are going to work at the grassroots and do it. I don't think it's impossible at all. So I think all of us must sit together and think of a method wherein which this sort of exercise is undertaken, number one, for SIR, and then number two, even the small things we can do, write, amplify, engage. So there's an ecosystem of positivity, like Dr. Devi is trying to do. And I would even say, if there is a government, a BJP government in a state, where there is this kind of a bloody-minded SIR being undertaken, why can't there be attempt at civil disobedience to just say that no, whole mohallas, whole towns, whole districts are not going to be part of this? What will happen? How much of the citizenry can actually be cancelled? I think we have to also start testing ourselves. I think we also have to start testing our adversary. And I think something is preventing us from doing that. And I think we have to isolate that. And we have to understand it. And we have to ensure that that stops. So we are going to develop alliances with civil society, with academia, with tribal, agricultural, other working class movements and groups. And then we have to translate this diagnosis into a collective plan of action, which all of us buy into, which is doable, which is credible, and which we will do. And I think we must all today not go away just after this meeting thinking, bahut badhiya ho gaya. I think otherwise we will really regret the time we are losing and the time we are wasting. And I think simple statements, resolutions, CCG has been writing for years. It's not enough. Now that time is over. I think it's really important that we have to think of what we are going to do on a daily basis, on the ground, in the field. So what form will we take? It happened during our independence struggle. It happened during the JP struggle. It can happen. And I think enough people have been pushed to a kind of wall. And I think we have to start reading the writing, the writing on the wall even for ourselves. So what are we left to do? So I want to really open this session to all of you because all of you have given your full day. You would not be here if this did not matter to you. And I think all of us need to put our collective heads together and really talk about what we must do. And because we're seeing, even today as we speak, the state of this Dipke, Abhijit Dipke and this Sonam Wangchuk, he's on his 4th day. He's also a senior person. And it's really a kind of failure through attrition and ignoring it. And that we can't allow to happen. So what is our method of dismantling this architecture of indifference and revenge? And can there not be an attempt at answerability? Can we allow top civil servants to just keep steamrolling all over all the effective rules of the nation? So I think we should resolve that we are not leaving till we devise an alternative vision, some alternative plan for reconstruction, just to restore a modicum of decency, just plain common decency, kindness, equality in our political life. So I leave it open to you.
इतने कॉम्प्लिकेटेड इश्यूज के बारे में बहुत जानकारी ली और जितने दुख भरे दिल से यहाँ आए थे उससे ज्यादा दुख भरे दिल से वापस जाएंगे। सिचुएशन बहुत मुश्किल लग रही है। आप हिंदी समझते हैं ऐसा मैं मानता हूँ, हिंदी में, अदरवाइज आई स्विच टू इंग्लिश। अब बच्चों हिंदी समझते हैं तो मैं अंग्रेजी में भी बोलूँगा थोड़ा। It is true. Somebody mentioned Adolf Hitler during the day. हाँ, उनके वो ब्लैक शर्ट्स थे, मुसोलिनी के, हिटलर के स्टॉर्म ट्रूपर्स थे, लेकिन मुसोलिनी ने ब्लैक शर्ट्स निकाले और हिटलर ने स्टॉर्म ट्रूपर्स निकाले। यहाँ पहले ब्लैक शर्ट या तो फुल ट्राउजर्स, अभी हाफ ट्राउजर से फुल ट्राउजर, और फिर जो रेजिम में वो आया है, इट्स अ वेरी बिग डिफरेंस। कंसिडर दिस। वो फैसिज्म और ये जमीन आसमान का फर्क है। देयर इज एन आइडियोलॉजी, अनफॉर्चुनेटली wrongly fixed, about which Nirja ji spoke this morning. She quoted from a text of 1923. 1923 बहुत पुराना लग रहा है, लेकिन उस टेक्स्ट के आधार पे she mentioned the 3rd paragraph of that text की, जिसमें सिटीजन क्या कौन है ये एक बार तय कर दिया, that is being imposed. The violence is not generated. The violence was forewritten. It is now only inaugurated here. ये मैं जब सुबह आया यहाँ तो मैंने दोस्तों को पूछा, मेरे साथ जो आए उनको बहुत अच्छा लग रहा था, मुझे भी अच्छा लग रहा था, आपको भी अच्छा लगता होगा। मीटिंग तो बहुत जगह होती है, गांव में होती है, शहरों में होती है, यूनिवर्सिटीज में, अलग अलग जगह। बट व्हेन यू कम टू ए मीटिंग बीइंग हेल्ड एट द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन क्लब, जितनी श्रद्धा के साथ, आस्था के साथ मंदिर जाते, उतनी श्रद्धा के साथ हम यहाँ आते, बिकॉज वी स्वेयर बाय द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन। इट ब्रॉट many conversations which were taking place for the last 2000 years or longer, from Buddha into the Vedic society, or during the Bhakti period, during the freedom struggle. The constitution brought them to a conclusion, taking us to a modern world filled with light, hope. Those conversations are gagged now. हम बात कर रहे थे, डॉक्टर कुरैशी की बहुत इज्जत मैं करता हूँ, जस्टिस एपी शाह, फुल वन नेशन वन इलेक्शन। मैं तो सोच रहा था कि इस समय आधा नेशन बना है और आधी इलेक्शन है, उसको वन बनने दीजिए, नॉट वन नेशन वन इलेक्शन, ट्रंकेटेड नेशन एंड ट्रंकेटेड इलेक्शन। Ask Professor Zoya Hassan is here, and every time she writes a post, I cry, literally cry. I don't respond because I'm not good at social media. पूछो एक मुस्लिम के दिल में आज क्या है? It's darkness. Think of a denotified tribes. गोपाल पिल्ले सर, आपने सेंसस के बारे में बात की, बट दिस सेंसस इज नॉट लाइक अर्लियर सेंसस। ये 12 करोड़ डी नोटिफाइड ट्राइब्स का क्या कर रहा है सेंसस? सॉरी, मैं माय वॉइस इज, मुझे बहुत गुस्सा आता है, मैं आई विल ट्राई टू कंट्रोल माई सेल्फ। दे आर नॉट बीइंग काउंटेड। गवर्नमेंट कमिटीज के कितने रिपोर्ट्स है कि आप डीएनटी का काउंट करो? सुप्रीम कोर्ट के पास हम गए, सुप्रीम कोर्ट के चीफ जस्टिस ने उसको बाहर फेंक दिया, वो पिटीशन को, बोले देयर इज some foreign hand behind this. The Supreme Court Chief Justice is saying to me, I spent 30 years fighting for denotified tribes. मेरे पीछे कोई हाथ नहीं है, न फॉरेन का है, न देश का है, न कुछ नहीं। These people are in the streets. Census is today a fraud on the nation, because instead of taking place in 2023 is pushed to 2027 just in order to do the delimitation जिसके नक्शे पहले से बने हैं कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंसीज के, and to change the entire political landscape of the country. उसके बाद क्या वन इलेक्शन, क्या वन नेशन, देयर वोंट बी ए पॉसिबिलिटी ऑफ एनी काइंड ऑफ इलेक्शन एट ऑल। इस हालत में हम पहुंच गए हैं। वन नेशन, देयर इज गवर्नमेंट फंडिंग प्रोवाइडेड फॉर ए बॉडी नेम्ड एज भारत भाषा समिति, which is absolutely mightily bent on proving that the Sanskrit is the original language of this. यहाँ 65,000 ईयर पहले लोग साउथ अफ्रीका से आए, साउथ नहीं अफ्रीका से आए। ये होमोसेपियन, आप सब, मैं होमोसेपियन समझते खुद को। कितनी हजारों भाषा थी संस्कृत के पहले, सिंधु संस्कृति के पहले संस्कृत है, संस्कृत से सब कुछ निकला, वही एक देश की संस्कृति है, वही राष्ट्र है, और उसी राष्ट्र को वैलिडिटी होगी। बाकी सब कचरा है, पोल्यूशन है, उसको बाहर फेंक दो। वी आर मूविंग वेरी रैपिडली, इनएक्सोरेबली, इरिवर्सेबली टुवर्ड्स एन अनटोल्ड, अनप्रेसिडेंटेड जेनोसाइड। मैं ये बड़े जिम्मेदारी के साथ कहता हूं, इसके लिए अगर मुझे कोई अरेस्ट करे तो मैं जेल जाने में तैयार हूं। Why am I talking of genocide? स्ट्रॉन्ग शब्द है, नॉर्मल कॉन्वर्सेशन में ठीक नहीं लगता, घर के अंदर बोले तो कोई कहेगा कि आप थोड़ा धीरे से बोले, लेकिन मैं आज बोलना चाहता हूं। I was born in 1950, the year the Republic of India was born, and I feel responsible to that republic. 3 तरह के जो काउंट शुरू है वो बहुत ही, एक तो कॉमिक लगते हैं, या तो फिजूल लगते हैं, दे आर आइदर यूजलेस, आई मीन कंप्लीटली इस वेस्टेज, और देर व्हाट इज 3 काउंट्स कौन से? एक एसआईआर काउंट हो रहा है, आप वोटर है या नहीं, सुबह बहुत बात हुई, एंड इज फ्राइटनिंग व्हाट मिस्टर लवासा सेड, यू नो, व्हाट जस्टिस, Honorable Justice Madan Lokur said, very frightening, very frightening. एसआईआर आपका काउंट होगा, उसके बाद सेंसस वाले काउंट करेंगे। अब ऐसा, और तीसरा डेमोग्राफिक कमिटी। अब एसआईआर भी हो गया, सेंसस भी हो गया, कौन सी डेमोग्राफिक कमिटी का क्या काम है? और उसमें सेंसस का अधिकारी जो आरजीआई लगाया है काम में, उसमें डेमोग्राफर नहीं है। दे विल, द डेमोग्राफिक कमिटी विल कम अप, वी डोंट हैव टू वेट फॉर द रिजल्ट्स टू कम। जैसे बंगाल इलेक्शन के पहले हमें पता था कौन जीतने वाला है टेक्निकली। दे विल कम अप विद द फाइंडिंग्स, कौन कौन से स्टेट में बहुत ज्यादा मुस्लिम बाहर से घुस गए। इधर लीडरशिप जो है वो छोटा मोटा एम्यूनेशन छोड़ के आपको गुस्सा लाएगी। आप, आई एम नॉट टॉकिंग इंडिविजुअली ऑफ यू, बट पीपल, वो गलिबल पीपल हु बिलीव, they will go out and carry out the genocide. The numbers will be huge. I said unprecedented. We are very close to that date, that point. ऐसे समय हम क्या कर सकते हैं? तो हम ये कर सकते हैं that we remember that we belong to a great country which has great traditions of resistance in the past. ये भूल जाइए कि आप अंबेडकर को फॉलो करते हैं, गांधी को, दैट्स ए कंप्लीटली यूजलेस डिबेट नाउ। फॉरगेट अबाउट कि आप लोहिया के हैं या और किसी। रिमेंबर दैट वी बिलोंग टू ए ग्रेट कंट्री विच हैज डेवलप्ड मेनी मेथड्स ऑफ रेजिस्टेंस। मैं आपको एक उदाहरण देता हूं। सिटीजनशिप की क्राइसिस है ना, ए सिमिलर क्राइसिस, not with the identical features, but essentially the same crisis was faced in South Africa in 1910s. Gandhi struggled against that. Professor, Aditya Mukherjee is corroborating. Gandhi's struggle against the discrimination, citizenship discrimination. It was not racial discrimination, it was a citizenship discrimination. That experiment failed for first 2 years. It succeeded. मैं हिंदी में बात करता हूँ। वो फेल हो रहा, वो सक्सीड, वो उसे यश कब आया? तो एक दिन गांधी को कस्तूरबा बोली कि आप अकेले पढ़ रहे, मैं आपके साथ चलूंगी। 100 माइल चलना था। अपने श्याम बेनेगल की मेकिंग ऑफ महात्मा फिल्म देखिए तो उसमें स्टोरी है। कस्तूरबा आई तो दूसरी औरतें, वो तमिल स्पीकिंग, भोजपुरी स्पीकिंग एंड गुजराती स्पीकिंग वीमेन जॉइंट कस्तूरबा। वो सब औरतें आई तो वहां की लोकल औरतें साथ में, वो औरतें आई तो आदमी आए, आदमी नहीं पुरुष आए, मेरी हिंदी खराब है, मेन केम, एंड देन इट बिकेम क्वाइट ए कारवा बनता गया। द लॉ हैड टू बी विड्रॉन। आई एम सजेस्टिंग अदिति जी, with an appeal to you personally and to everybody present here, अगर इस हॉल में बहुत संघर्ष शुरू है अलग अलग डिस्ट्रिक्ट में, कोस्टल लोगों का बहुत बड़ी मूवमेंट है। आप अगर केरला कर्नाटक में जाके देखिए, गोवा में देयर इज ए मूवमेंट गोइंग ऑन, आदिवासियों की मूवमेंट शुरू है, स्टूडेंट्स की अलग अलग मूवमेंट शुरू है, मेनी टीचर्स, स्कूल टीचर्स की इज नॉट, वी आर नॉट शॉर्ट ऑफ मूवमेंट्स। आपने सही कहा, मेरे तमिलनाडु के दोस्त, आपने सही कहा, वी मस्ट यूनाइट, resistance, united resistance, not resistance by uniting, but unite, be connected, all resistance movements connected. लेकिन one thing, एक बात है, अगर इस हॉल में असलियत में कंसर्न लगता होगा कि इलेक्शन सब खराब हो गई है, इस देश का बहुत नुकसान हो गया है, बहुत फैसिज्म, बहुत ऑटोक्रेसी, बहुत कुछ, सब कुछ बढ़ गया है, तो मेरे बहनों को यहाँ जो उपस्थित है, मैं एक सवाल पूछना चाहता हूँ कि क्या आप जेल जाना पसंद करेगी? आपकी, अगर इस संघर्ष में आपको जेल जाना पड़ा तो आपकी तैयारी ऐसी कोई औरत यहाँ है क्या? आई विल बिगिन विथ सुरेखा, कम फॉरवर्ड। हाँ, हियर इज माय जीवन साथी, वो बोलती कि जाएगी, मैं भी जाऊंगा। क्या आईएएस ऑफिसर जेल में जाने के लिए तैयार है क्या? मैं आपको पर्सनल कमिटमेंट नहीं मांग रहा हूं, कोई आपकी लिस्ट नहीं बनाएगा। आई एम आस्किंग ए क्वेश्चन, जिसका करेज है। अगर इस समय हम सब चीजें समझ रहे देश में, एवरीबडी अंडरस्टैंड्स एवरीथिंग, दैट इज द ट्रेजेडी इन अ वे। एवरीबडी नोज व्हाट नीड्स टू बी डन, बट हु विल टेक द फर्स्ट स्टेप फॉरवर्ड? We all should be ready to lose fear. She asked, कुछ हो रहा है जिससे हम आगे नहीं आ रहे. She did not say that word, I utter that word. If we cross fear, we can save this country. If we remain afraid, we cannot. We cannot. We will go in our graves, and when our graves will be dug up hundreds of years later, those future generations will say, these are the graves of cowards, moral cowards. गांधी जी ने और कस्तूरबा ने ये सवाल उस समय उठाया था, इसलिए सिटीजनशिप के फाइट में वो इस देश में नहीं दूसरे देश में सक्सेसफुल हुए थे। थिंक ऑफ दिस। दूसरी बात मैं कहना चाहता हूं, डेमोग्राफिक कमीशन ये झूठ ही आगे रखेगा देश के सामने, ये समझ के और सोच के उसके बाद एक 100 सिग्नेचर का लेटर लिखने के बजाय मैं आपके साथ और स्टेट के बहुत सारे लोगों के साथ, बिफोर द गवर्नमेंट कम्स अप विथ ए डेमोग्राफिक कमिटी रिपोर्ट, want to create a people's demographic committee report. We started the work in Madhya Pradesh, in Rajasthan, all the border districts. We will go and find out कितने घुसपैठिया है। अगर मैं बोलूं इस समय इस हॉल में 4 घुसपैठिया है, आप यहां से हलना नहीं, मैं आपका प्रोटेक्शन करूंगा, what nonsense. People must come forward and actually do their own demographic report and tell the government that your report is bogus, false. It won't succeed in generating anger leading to genocide. If that is not prepared, then a genocide is certain. We will only take photographs of the genocide. We will become analysts. We will become column writers. For each column, 15,000 rupees we will receive. Nothing more. That is the second action. The third thing I want to suggest, मैं अंग्रेजी बोल रहा हूँ, तो बहुत सारे प्रशासकीय अधिकारी अंग्रेजी बोलते हैं हर स्टेट में, तो क्यों ना हमारे जैसे लोग हर स्टेट में जहाँ बीजेपी का रूल है, जहाँ जिसका भी रूल हो, उनके साथ जाके एक विवेक संवाद लेते, that we understand that you in service you have limitations but things are wrong. If you can afford to be किसी ने कहा स्पाइन की बात, किसी ने की स्पाइनल सर्जन, हाँ, यस, मिस्टर लवासा, करेक्ट, मिस्टर लवासा reminded us system, हाँ, so reminded us that we are homo sapiens because we got a spine, and हम एक विवेक संवाद करें ऐसे में। नॉर्मल एक्टिविस्ट विल नॉट एग्री विद दिस, उनको लगेगा क्या ये विनोबा भावे जैसे बात कर रहे हैं, जिन्होंने मार्क्स पढ़ा है, जिन्होंने अंबेडकर पढ़ा वगैरह वगैरह, मैं उन सब की इज्जत करता हूँ, लेकिन मैं इंसान की भलाई पे भरोसा रखता हूँ। जब तक हम वो संवाद नहीं करते, विवेक संवाद, ए कॉन्शियस डायलॉग, इफ 8 or 10 वाइस चांसलर, आईएएस ऑफिसर्स, जजेस, लॉयर्स वगैरह वगैरह, यू डिसाइड, हर स्टेट में जाके वहां के प्रशासकीय अधिकारी के साथ एक अटेम्प्ट करना चाहिए। इफ दे डोंट कोऑपरेट, और एक अटेम्प्ट करना चाहिए। इफ दे स्टिल डोंट कोऑपरेट, देन वी हैव द सेटिस्फैक्शन दैट वी मेड एन अटेम्प्ट। क्या लोग आगे आने के लिए तैयार हैं? अगर वो नहीं आगे आते, केवल एडवाइस देना चाहते, तो इट्स मच बेटर दे ज्वाइन द रूलिंग रेजिम एंड बिकम पार्ट ऑफ वेरियस एडवाइजरी कमिटीज, क्योंकि वहां ज्यादा, there's no point in taking a moral position and be a coward. I'm speaking, without any reserve. I might lose friends in the process, but I'm talking in the interest of the nation. Women must take the front line. अब कोई बहन बोलेगी कि ये बर्डन औरतों पे ही क्यों डाल रहे हैं? मैं इसलिए नहीं उनके ऊपर डाल रहा हूँ उनको कोई सजा हो, मैं उनके ऊपर इसलिए डाल रहा हूँ कि जो पुरुष जो है ज्यादा बेईमान है, उनको शर्माना चाहिए, इसलिए मैं कह रहा हूँ. दैट्स ऑल अबाउट इट. If we don't think of these kind of steps, and if we think of only logic, only petitions, only court cases, nobody has to come and tell us that the court will not deliver. अच्छा, दूसरी तरफ मुझे बहुत सारे लोग पूछते कि श्रीलंका में हुआ, बांग्लादेश में हुआ, अरब स्प्रिंग हुआ, हमारे आप. There were two very frightening questions which came today. One was Yogendra, he said, are you sure there will be a peaceful transfer of power? और दूसरा था वृंदा ग्रोवर का. She said to Justice Lokur, there is still an element of faith in the court. ये सवाल मुझे डरावने इसलिए लग रहे हैं कि देखिए, अपने घर में जब झगड़ा होता है, आप बेल बजाना जब भी जरूरत है, लेकिन मैं बोलना, अपने घर में झगड़ा होता है तो अपने घर को आग नहीं लगाते, घर नहीं जलाते. The system that we have got, the democracy that we have got, and democracy is the term, but is a huge huge machine, huge architecture. वो आसानी से नहीं मिला है. We can't break that architecture just because I disagree with my brother or sister. इसलिए बांग्लादेश ठीक है, तो श्रीलंका ठीक है, not in our country. We should think of a different path, which is a unique path. If we can do it, we will be able to solve these problems quite effectively. If we do it, democracy all over the world has become very weak. और वो ये इसलिए नहीं कि डेमोक्रेसी इज अ बैड सिस्टम. इससे ज्यादा सिविलाइज कोई सिस्टम हो ही नहीं सकती. उसमें बहुत सारी कमियां हैं, लेकिन इससे आई थिंक डिडंट समबडी से इट्स अ वेरी बैड सिस्टम, ऑल अदर सिस्टम्स आर वर्स वगैरह. बट इफ वी कैनॉट टेक इट टू ए मोर डेवलप्ड फॉर्म, उत्क्रांति का नियम है, लॉ ऑफ एवोल्यूशन. अगर हम स्टैग्नेशन पे आ गए तो इट स्टार्ट्स लुकिंग अनअट्रैक्टिव. एंड व्हाट विल बी द वे फॉरवर्ड टू टेक इट टू अ हायर स्टेज, ए बेटर डेमोक्रेसी? एंड इट इज टू थिंक ऑफ ऑल फॉर्म्स ऑफ लाइफ इन आवर डेमोक्रेसी. ऑल फॉर्म्स ऑफ लाइफ शुड हैव रिप्रेजेंटेशन. कॉल इट ग्रीन डेमोक्रेसी और वॉटर कलर नेम से कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता. All forms of life should be represented in our collective decision, because there is a correlation between who we are and who the other life forms are, particularly in the times of climatic conditions and biological depletion वगैरह. all जो सभी technical terms आप जानते ही. A greener democracy with all forms of life represented. और दूसरा, मुझे कुरैशी साहब की बात बहुत मेरे दिल में बिल्कुल अंदर तक. सर, डॉक्टर कुरैशी जी, मैं आपका फैन बन गया हूं आज. मैं गुस्सा इसलिए, why talk of one nation, one election? We should talk of forever nation, forever election. Forever nation का मतलब होता है नेशन के पहले सिटीजन आता है. Citizens constitute the nation. और forever election का मतलब है, जिसे दूसरी जगह लिक्विड डेमोक्रेसी कहते. बहुत बार उनको पुकार दे के वापिस आओ दोस्त, आप मेरा काम नहीं कर रहे, ये कहने की हिम्मत बनाए. All the way from panchayat to presidential election. This ability, अगर हम citizens को empower करें तो with the power to, मैं recall वगैरह नहीं बोल रहा हूँ, मेसी होता है वो recall, but there is a form called liquid democracy. उसमें हमेशा उनको टोक सकते, रोक सकते, धक्का लगा सकते. Forever election, forever nation, not one election, one nation. That should be the spirit of the future democracies. If अगर हम इस समय इंडिया में रेजिस्टेंस निर्माण कर सके इस ढंग से, और अगर हम डेमोक्रेसी का नया मॉडल प्रस्थापित कर सके, तो दुनिया की 20% पॉपुलेशन इस देश में है. आउट ऑफ 750 crores, we will have set up a new example for a new global era. और ये करना, ये बिल्कुल इस हॉल के अंदर जितने बैठे उनके हाथ में है. अगर हम शुरुआत करें तो. आई स्टॉप.
तो देखिए, बहुत इम्पॉर्टेंट चीज़ है फेडरलिज्म, यानी कि स्टेट और केंद्र के बीच में जो एक रिलेशनशिप्स होता है, जिसमें अधिकार दिए जाते हैं, किसका क्या अधिकार है और किसको किस तरह से काम किया जाता है. लोगों को मौजूदा सरकार ज़रूर कहती है कि डबल इंजन की सरकार है जो आपके सारे काम कर देगी, लेकिन डबल इंजन का कितना बुरा असर एक आम नागरिक पर पड़ता है ये भी आपको बताया गया. इसी तरह की चर्चाएं सिर्फ आपको स्वतंत्र पर देखने को मिलेंगी. अपने दोस्त हैदर अब्बास नकवी को इजाज़त दें. फिर होगी मुलाकात एक नई चर्चा के साथ. तब तक के लिए नमस्कार.